Lena had always been the shy, reserved type. Growing up in a small town, she was the kind of girl who kept to herself, focusing on school, work, and taking care of her family. She had always been a bit of a perfectionist, making sure everything in her life was in order, particularly when it came to her health. So when she felt some odd symptoms coming on, it didn't take long for her to decide to visit the doctor. She'd never been in any serious relationships, and her life was fairly quiet. No one would have guessed it, but Lena was still a virgin. At 22, something she'd always kept to herself. It wasn't that she was against relationships or intimacy. She just hadn't met anyone she felt comfortable with. Her visit to Dr. Simmons, the local physician, wasn't unusual. He was the best doctor in the area, trusted by everyone. He had always been kind and professional, and Lena had seen him a few times for various minor health issues. This time, however, something felt different. She had been feeling nauseous, tired, and had noticed a strange heaviness in her body. She made an appointment, hoping it was just some seasonal flu, or maybe stress catching up with her. Dr. Simmons was thorough, asking her about her symptoms and checking her vitals. After a few minutes, he suggested some blood work and an ultrasound, just to rule out anything serious. Lena, feeling embarrassed and a little uncomfortable, agreed, not thinking much of it. A few days later, Lena received a call from the clinic. It was Dr. Simmons' nurse, asking her to come in for a follow-up. Lena was confused. Everything she had been told sounded routine. Why was there such urgency? When Lena arrived at the office, she was led into a small examination room. The nurse left, and soon after, Dr. Simmons walked in. He had a serious expression on his face, something Lena hadn't seen before. "Lena, there's something we need to talk about," Dr. Simmons said, his voice soft but urgent. "The results from your tests, they're a little unusual." Lena felt a knot form in her stomach. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dr. Simmons looked at her, his gaze not unkind but filled with something she couldn't quite place. "You're pregnant." Lena stared at him, the world around her suddenly feeling too small, too tight. "What? That's impossible. I've never been with anyone," she stammered, shaking her head in disbelief. Dr. Simmons frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I know this is going to be hard to understand, but we've run multiple tests. You're pregnant, Lena. We need to figure out how this happened." Lena's mind raced. How could this be? She had always been so careful, so cautious. There was no way this could be happening to her. She looked at Dr. Simmons, trying to make sense of his words. Could it be a mistake? Was there some mix-up with the results? But no, the evidence was right in front of her. She was pregnant. The room felt as if it was closing in on her, and for a moment, she was too stunned to say anything. She had trusted Dr. Simmons, trusted him with her health, and now, this. Her thoughts were a mess of confusion, fear, and anger. How could this happen, and why did it have to happen to her? Dr. Simmons seemed to sense her distress. He took a deep breath and sat down beside her. "Lena, I know this is a lot to process, but I need you to stay calm. We'll work through this. I'll help you figure out what to do next." But Lena wasn't sure if she could stay calm. This wasn't just about her health anymore. It was about something far more complicated. Something that would change her life forever. Lena sat in the sterile white-walled examination room, her hands trembling in her lap. The shock of what Dr. Simmons had just told her still hadn't fully sunk in. Her mind was a jumble of questions, but none of them made sense. How could she be pregnant? She had never been with anyone, never even kissed a man seriously. Yet, here she was, sitting in a doctor's office, hearing the words no one ever expects to hear. Dr. Simmons seemed to sense her panic, but his attempt to reassure her didn't help much. "I know this is overwhelming, but we'll take it one step at a time," he said gently, though his voice had an edge of uncertainty. "We can run more tests if you'd like, but the results are very clear." Lena shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "But how? I've never been with anyone. Doctor, this doesn't make sense. What are you saying?" Her voice cracked with the last word, and she could feel the weight of his gaze on her. Dr. Simmons sighed deeply, clearly trying to figure out how to explain the impossible. "I don't know yet. We'll need to investigate more, but there's no denying the results. You're pregnant, Lena." There was a long silence. Lena couldn't look at him anymore. She stared at the floor, hoping that somehow, the truth would change, that this was all some awful dream she would wake up from. But it didn't change. "I want to understand," Lena whispered, almost to herself. I want to understand how this happened. Dr. Simmons leaned back in his chair. There are theories, Lena. The truth is, this kind of thing is incredibly rare, but it's not impossible. There's a possibility of artificial insemination somehow, through a procedure or an error that could have led to this. It's not a typical method, but there have been isolated cases. Lena's heart raced as the words hit her like a punch to the gut. Artificial insemination. She had never even considered it. She wasn't even sure how it worked. She certainly hadn't asked for it. The only thing she knew for sure was that she had never been physically intimate with anyone. Are you suggesting that someone did this to me? She asked, her voice shaking with a mix of horror and disbelief. Dr. Simmons' eyes widened, clearly realizing how his words might have sounded. No, that's not what I meant. I don't know how else to explain it. I'm not suggesting anyone did anything malicious. It could have been a medical mistake or something along those lines. Lena's mind whirled. A medical mistake. She felt a sudden chill in her bones. She had always trusted Dr. Simmons, but the idea of something like this happening to her, especially under his care, was too much to bear. How could she ever trust her body or him again? Maybe you should get a second opinion, she murmured, her voice barely audible. Dr. Simmons frowned. I understand how this is hard to process, but I've been practicing for a long time, Lena. I'm not mistaken. Lena's stomach churned. Her eyes burned from holding back tears, and she couldn't help but feel betrayed. Dr. Simmons, the trusted local doctor, had somehow, unknowingly, played a role in this nightmare. But how could something like this happen? What do I do now? Lena whispered, her voice empty of hope. She wanted to leave, to escape this horrible reality, but she couldn't. She was trapped in it. We'll figure it out, Dr. Simmons said quietly, standing up. He took a step toward her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I'm here to help you, Lena. I know this isn't easy, but we'll find a way through it. Lena nodded, stiffly, not sure if she believed him anymore. She stood up, gathering her things in a daze. As she walked out of the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just been turned upside down, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Lena walked out of Dr. Simmons' office in a daze, her mind spinning with the impossibility of it all. The cool air outside hit her face, but it did nothing to ease the burning sensation behind her eyes. She had to hold herself together. She couldn't break down in public. She needed to make sense of everything that had just happened, but the more she tried to wrap her head around it, the more the puzzle pieces refused to fit. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, dragging her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her best friend, Emma. Hey, how did it go? I'm thinking of coming over later. Want to talk? Lena stared at the text, unsure of how to respond. How could she explain this to Emma? How could she tell her that something she could never even imagine had just happened to her? She swallowed hard, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. She typed back a quick reply. I'm okay. Just a little overwhelmed. I'll talk to you later. Lena wasn't ready to face anyone, especially not Emma. She knew Emma would ask a million questions, and right now, Lena didn't even have answers. Not to mention the fact that Emma had always been the more outgoing of the two of them. She had a boyfriend, she'd been sexually active, and she was always the one who had all the advice when it came to relationships. Lena felt like she was living in a completely different world. She needed time to think, to process this insane turn of events. With shaky hands, she grabbed a cab back to her apartment. The familiar ride, doing little to calm her nerves. Once inside, Lena closed the door behind her and sank onto the couch. She felt like she was suffocating, the walls of her small apartment closing in on her. The quiet of her space felt wrong, as if everything she had known was slowly slipping away. She had always thought that if she kept everything in her life under control, nothing could go wrong. But now, everything was chaos. Her phone buzzed. Again, and this time it was Dr. Simmons. I know this is a lot to take in. I just wanted to remind you that I'm here for any questions you might have. Take some time, but we need to talk soon about your options. Lena stared at the message for a long time, her finger hovering over the screen. She wanted to ignore it, to pretend that this wasn't real, but she couldn't. No matter how hard she tried, the truth wouldn't go away. She was pregnant by someone she didn't even know how she had come into contact with. Her mind raced. Was it possible Dr. Simmons was telling the truth? Could a mistake, an error, really cause this? And if so, what did that mean for her now? Was she supposed to just accept this? She had so many questions, but none of them had clear answers. Lena knew one thing for sure: she couldn't handle this alone. She needed to talk to someone who would understand, someone who wouldn't judge her. Suddenly, her phone rang. The number was unrecognized, but Lena hesitated only a moment before answering. She wasn't in the mood for any surprises, but her curiosity got the best of her. "Hello," she answered, her voice cracking. "Lena." The voice on the other end was familiar, but it took her a second to place it. "It's Dr. Simmons." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "Dr. Simmons, why are you calling me again?" "I know you're going through a lot right now," he said, his voice softer than before, "but I think we need to discuss things in more detail. We need to figure out the next steps." Lena didn't respond immediately. She was still processing everything he had told her earlier. "What next steps?" she asked quietly. "How do you even fix something like this?" "I don't know if we can fix it," Dr. Simmons said, a tone of regret in his voice, "but we have options. We can go through a more thorough investigation to understand exactly what happened, and then we'll talk about your options for the pregnancy. It's important that you have all the information." Lena didn't want to hear about options. She didn't want to hear about anything. She just wanted to be able to wake up from this nightmare. But she also knew that avoiding the truth wouldn't make it go away. "I'll think about it," she said softly, then quickly ended the call. She dropped the phone on the coffee table and let her hands fall into her lap. Tears were finally streaming down her face, but there was no comfort in them, only pain. She didn't know what to do next. Everything had changed so fast, and she was still trying to figure out how to cope with the shock. She couldn't even imagine what her family, her friends, or anyone in her life would think. Her stomach twisted painfully as the gravity of her situation settled in. She wasn't just dealing with an unexpected pregnancy. She was dealing with the betrayal of her body by someone she trusted. Lena spent the next few days trapped in a haze of confusion and anxiety. The days blurred together as she found herself pacing around her apartment, unable to sit still for longer than a few minutes. Each time her phone rang or pinged with a new message, her heart skipped a beat, thinking it might be some sort of answer, some revelation that could clear up the chaos in her mind. But nothing came. Nothing made sense. She couldn't avoid the inevitable for long, though her mind was screaming at her to do something, anything, to regain control. It wasn't just the pregnancy, it was the fact that she felt violated in a way she never could have imagined. How had this happened? How had she allowed herself to be put in a situation where she didn't even understand what had occurred to her body? Lena finally decided she needed to go back to Dr. Simmons. She couldn't keep running from the truth. She had to confront it head-on, even if it meant unraveling everything she thought she knew about herself, her life, and her relationship with him. She made the appointment, her hands trembling as she typed out the confirmation on her phone. When the day arrived, she walked into the clinic with a sense of dread pressing down on her chest. This time, it wasn't just a routine checkup, it was a confrontation with the unknown. The receptionist smiled at her warmly as Lena approached, but it didn't reach her eyes. Lena nodded silently and sat down in the waiting area, her mind racing. She couldn't stop thinking about what Dr. Simmons might say next, or what new revelation would make this nightmare even worse. What was really going on? Could there be some other explanation? Some hidden truth that would make everything make sense? Lena, a nurse called her name, breaking through her spiraling thoughts. She followed the nurse down the familiar hall to the same examination room where everything had begun. Lena could already feel the tension building in her shoulders as she stepped inside. She wasn't sure what was more frightening, the fact that her life had completely shifted, or the fact that she was about to sit across from the man who had caused it. Dr. Simmons was already seated, his expression professional but slightly guarded, like he was preparing for something. He didn't smile when he saw her, and for the first time, Lena felt like she was the one who had to break the silence. "Dr. Simmons," she started, her voice shaky but firm, "I don't understand what happened. You say I'm pregnant, but I've never been with anyone. How is that even possible?" Dr. Simmons took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for what was about to come. He sat back in his chair, eyes meeting hers seriously. "I know this is hard to hear, Lena, but what I'm about to say won't make things easier. I've been reviewing your case extensively. The truth is, this situation is extremely rare, but not impossible." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. She could hear the weight of his words. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's possible that you were unknowingly part of a fertility procedure. There are a number of ways this could have happened. especially if you were in the vicinity of a medical setting, like a clinic or hospital. He paused, then added, "There's a chance, Lena, that you were unknowingly in." Lena's world came crashing down again. What? How? No, I would have known. I would have known if something like that had happened. I know this is very difficult to accept, Dr. Simmons said gently, leaning forward, but it's not as rare as you might think. Medical mistakes do happen, though they're exceedingly rare. I can't explain how it happened, but I can help you figure out how to move forward. Lena's head was spinning. She wanted to argue, to scream at him, to demand some other answer. But what answer was there? Could she really call it a mistake? The thought of being violated in some way, of having her body manipulated without her consent, was beyond terrifying. It was a betrayal one she could never have prepared for. How could this happen? How could you let this happen? She found herself asking, her voice trembling with emotion. She was no longer angry at the situation but at herself for trusting Dr. Simmons so fully, for trusting anyone at all. "I understand your anger," Dr. Simmons replied, his voice calm but heavy with regret. "And I'm deeply sorry for what you're going through. I'm doing everything I can to help you understand how this happened and what we can do next. But how can I trust you now?" Lena spat out, her chest tight with the overwhelming weight of it all. "You're telling me that my entire life has changed because of something I didn't even know was happening. I thought you were supposed to be someone I could trust." Dr. Simmons' face softened, his eyes filled with genuine sympathy. "Lena, I didn't mean for this to happen. I never intended for you to go through this. But now that we know what's going on, we need to figure out how to move forward." Lena could feel the walls of the room closing in on her, suffocating her, making it harder to breathe. The thought of carrying a child she never wanted, a child she never even consciously made, filled her with dread. She had no idea how to move forward from here, and the idea of facing the world with this burden seemed impossible. "I don't know what to do," Lena whispered, her voice breaking as she let the tears finally fall. "I feel so lost." Dr. Simmons gave a soft sigh, his expression filled with sympathy. "We'll figure this out together, Lena. You have to go through this alone." Lena walked out of Dr. Simmons' office, with her heart heavy in her chest, her mind overwhelmed by the impossibility of everything that had unfolded. It had been hard enough to digest the fact that she was pregnant, but now the situation felt even worse. She didn't just feel like her life had been thrown into chaos, she felt like her body had been betrayed. As she sat in the back of the taxi on her way home, her mind continued to race. She couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Simmons' words. "It's possible you were unknowingly in." The phrase echoed in her ears, and she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her stomach. How could she ever move on from this? How could she trust anyone ever again? The thought of facing her family, her friends, or even herself, knowing that she was carrying a child that she hadn't chosen to have, made her feel like she was drowning in an ocean of confusion and fear. When she arrived at her apartment, the silence felt oppressive. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Emma. "Are you sure you're okay? You've been so distant. I'm really worried about you." Lena stared at the screen, for a moment, the words seeming to mock her. How could she tell Emma what had happened? How could she explain the inexplicable? She couldn't even make sense of it herself. Lena sat down on her couch and leaned her head back against the cushions, letting out a long, shaky breath. She closed her eyes and tried to calm herself, but the tears were relentless, pouring down her face like an unstoppable torrent. She had been through so much in her life, but nothing had ever shaken her like this. She reached for her phone again, this time dialing her mother's number. It was the first time she had considered reaching out to her, but she needed someone who could at least help her process all of this. As the phone rang, Lena's heart raced. What would her mother think? How would she react to this kind of news? "Hello." Her mother's voice sounded as warm and loving as always, but there was a slight edge of concern in it when Lena didn't immediately speak. "Mom," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to you. Something happened, and I don't know what to do." There was a long pause before her mother responded, her voice gentle. "Sweetheart, what's going on? You sound so upset. Come over." "Okay, I'll make us some tea, and we can talk." Lena hung up the phone with a mixture of relief and dread. Her mother would listen. She knew that much. But could she ever accept what had happened to her? Lena had no idea what to expect, but she couldn't keep this burden to herself any longer. She grabbed her jacket and headed to her mother's house. The familiar walk down the street offering little comfort. The sun had set by the time she arrived, and the quiet of the evening only deepened her sense of isolation. Her mother greeted her at the door with a warm hug, but Lena felt no warmth inside her. She couldn't shake the cold dread that had settled deep in her bones. They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from the mugs of tea her mother had made. Her mother's gentle eyes never left her, sensing the weight of what was unsaid. "Lena, sweetheart, what's going on? You can talk to me, you know that, right?" Lena took a deep breath and looked down at her hands. They were shaking, and for the first time in her life, she didn't know how to explain something. How could she even begin to put this into words? How could she explain that something had been done to her without her consent, something she couldn't even fully comprehend? "Mom, I'm pregnant," Lena whispered, her voice breaking. "But it's not like I didn't choose this. I've never been with anyone. I don't even understand how it happened." Her mother's face softened with a mixture of confusion and concern. She reached across the table and took Lena's hand in hers. "What do you mean, Lena? You're scaring me. How could this happen?" Lena squeezed her mother's hand, trying to find the words. She had no idea how to explain the doctor's vague and unsettling words about medical procedures and mistakes. She had no idea how to explain the deep sense of betrayal she felt, not just from Dr. Simmons, but from her own body. "I went to the doctor," Lena said, her voice shaky, "because I was feeling sick, and he told me I was pregnant, but I don't know how. I've never even kissed a guy, Mum, and the doctor, he said that it's possible I was part of some kind of procedure, like I was unknowingly in." Her mother's face paled, and she leaned back in her chair. "What?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "How could something like that happen? Why wouldn't you have known?" "I don't know," Lena whispered. "I don't understand any of it. But now I'm pregnant, and I don't even know who the father is. I feel like my whole life is just gone, and I don't know what to do." Her mother sat in stunned silence for a few moments, absorbing everything Lena had just said. She didn't know how to respond, and neither did Lena. How could they? There was no simple answer to this madness. Finally, her mother spoke, her voice soft and steady. "We'll figure this out together, okay? You're not alone in this, Lena. I know it's scary, but we'll take it one step at a time. We'll find out the truth. We'll make sure you're okay." Lena closed her eyes, the weight of everything crashing down on her once more. But her mother's words, simple as they were, gave her a small flicker of hope. She wasn't alone in this, not yet. But could she find the strength to face whatever came next? The days that followed felt like a blur. Lena went through the motions of her life, but everything felt detached, as though she were floating above her own reality. Dr. Simmons had called a few times to check in, but Lena couldn't bring herself to pick up the phone. She couldn't face him, not after what he had told her. The confusion, the anger, and the helplessness had swallowed her whole. She didn't want answers from him. She wanted answers from her own body, from the universe that seemed to be playing some cruel joke on her. Her mother had been a constant presence, offering support, but the weight of the situation still felt suffocating. Every time Lena looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger. How could she be pregnant? How could she be carrying a child she hadn't asked for, didn't want, and didn't understand? It was the weekend when her mother insisted that they go back to Dr. Simmons' office. "You need to confront this, sweetheart," her mother had said, her voice calm yet insistent. "You can't keep running away from it. You deserve the truth, and you'll get it, one way or another." Reluctantly, Lena agreed. It wasn't that she wanted to face Dr. Simmons, but she knew that avoiding him wasn't helping either. She needed some closure, even if it came with a dose of unbearable reality. They walked into the clinic together, Lena feeling like she was walking into the lion's den. Her mother held her hand, a comforting presence beside her, but the nerves were still there. The receptionist greeted them with a polite smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She knew something was wrong. Everyone knew something was wrong. They were led into the same examination room, and Lena felt a wave of dread wash over her as she sat down. The sterile white walls closed in on her, and she couldn't help but wonder how it had all gone so wrong. This wasn't supposed to be her life. She wasn't supposed to be here, confronting a mistake that she hadn't even known was possible. But here she was. Dr. Simmons walked in a few minutes later, his face as serious as ever. Lena could see the guilt in his eyes, but it didn't offer her any comfort. He had been the one to drop this bombshell on her life, and now he was the one who would have to help her clean up the mess. "Lena, I'm glad you came," he said softly, sitting down across from her. "I know this is difficult, but we need to talk. I've been reviewing the situation, and I think we need to get to the bottom of this." Lena didn't trust herself to speak, so her mother spoke for her. "What exactly is going on, Dr. Simmons? Lena needs to know what happened." Dr. Simmons looked at Lena, his expression filled with regret. "I've been investigating the situation further, and I'm afraid I made an error in judgment. Lena, the possibility of you being inseminated unknowingly it's extremely unlikely, and I misspoke when I mentioned that." He hesitated, as if unsure of how to continue. Lena felt a sense of both relief and frustration. Had it all been a mistake, or was there more to it than that? "I've since reviewed your medical history, and I believe the answer lies elsewhere," Dr. Simmons continued. "I can't explain why this happened or how, but there's something more I need to share with you. You were part of a clinical trial that I was running, something I've never disclosed to you. It was a research project involving fertility treatments, and in rare cases, the treatment can lead to unintended consequences." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had been part of a clinical trial. She had no memory of ever agreeing to anything like that. She shot a glance at her mother, who was equally stunned by the revelation. "You're saying I was part of an experiment?" Lena asked, her voice shaky. "Without my knowledge, without my consent?" Dr. Simmons nodded, his face pale. "I'm so sorry, Lena. At the time, you were treated for something minor, just some routine tests for a mild condition you had. The trial involved a new method of fertility preservation, and somehow, you were mistakenly enrolled in it. We've been trying to figure out how this could have happened, but the trial records show you were included in the group." Lena's mind was reeling. She had trusted this man with her health, and now she was finding out that she had been part of something she had never consented to. A wave of nausea washed over her, and she felt the room spin. "This is outrageous," Lena managed to say, through gritted teeth. "How could you let this happen? You've put my entire life in jeopardy, Dr. Simmons." Her voice was shaking with anger and betrayal. She had spent so long thinking this was a mistake, a one-time fluke, but the reality was far worse. This wasn't an accident, it was a breach of trust, an experiment without her knowledge. Dr. Simmons looked down, unable to meet her eyes. "I never meant for it to go this far. The trial was meant to help women, to give them options for the future, but somehow your case was mishandled. I never wanted this to happen to you, Lena. I'm truly sorry." Lena felt a lump form in her throat as she fought back tears. How could she ever forgive him? She didn't even know how to process what she was hearing. A clinical trial, a research project. She had been nothing more than a test subject, a lab rat, and no one had bothered to tell her. Her mother was the first to speak, her voice steady despite the clear anger in her eyes. "What are you going to do to fix this, Dr. Simmons? How are you going to make this right?" "I'm going to make sure Lena has all the support she needs," Dr. Simmons said quickly, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I'll help her with every decision she needs to make. I'll make sure she gets the care and counseling she needs." But it was too late. The trust had been broken, and no amount of apologies could undo the damage. Lena stood up, feeling the weight of the situation crush her chest. "I need to leave," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't do this anymore." As she walked out of the room, she could hear Dr. Simmons' voice calling after her. But she didn't stop. She didn't want to hear his excuses anymore. She didn't want to hear anything he had to say. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay here. Not in this town, not with these people who had betrayed her in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. Lena didn't know where she was going, but the raw, unrelenting pain inside her drove her feet forward, one step after another. She walked out of the clinic, her eyes blurry from the tears that had threatened to fall since she'd entered. The cool evening air hit her skin, but it didn't soothe the storm raging inside her. Her mind was spinning, reeling from the bombshell Dr. Simmons had dropped on her life. A clinical trial, a research experiment she had never consented to. How could she have been so naive? How had she trusted someone who could violate her so completely, even without intending to? As Lena walked aimlessly through the streets, her thoughts kept returning to one thing. What now? She had no idea. No plan, no way out. Her entire existence felt like it had been hijacked by a mistake that had been made by someone she should have been able to trust, and now she was left to deal with the consequences of a situation she hadn't chosen, a situation that threatened to define the rest of her life. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message. From Emma. I'm here for you, Lena. Please don't shut me out. Let me help. Lena read the message a few times, trying to summon the strength to reply. She couldn't shake the feeling that everyone around her would judge her, pity her, or worse, blame her. She felt like a failure, like she had lost control of her own life. But Emma's words were different. They weren't full of questions or accusations. They were just support, something she desperately needed right now. Lena stood on the corner of a street, the city lights flickering in the distance. She wanted to reach out to Emma, to let her in, to unload all the frustration, the confusion, the guilt that was eating away at her. But could she? Could she trust anyone again? After everything that had happened, she typed a quick reply. I don't know what to do anymore. Everything's just falling apart. Emma responded almost immediately. I'm coming over. We'll figure this out together. Okay? Just let me in. I'm not going anywhere. Lena stared at the screen, the weight of those words hitting her harder than she expected. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to stop trying to solve everything on her own. She wasn't alone in this. Not yet. And if she let her friends in, maybe, just maybe, she could start to put the shattered pieces of her life back together. She made her way back home, the walk feeling more like a journey of self-discovery than just the path from one place to another. It wasn't just about getting back to the safety of her apartment anymore. It was about understanding who she was, who she had become, and who she wanted to be in the face of all this chaos. When Lena finally arrived at her apartment, she found Emma waiting outside, sitting on the steps with a look of concern etched on her face. She stood up as soon as she saw Lena, her arms open in a gesture of comfort, and Lena collapsed into her embrace without hesitation. I'm so sorry you're going through this, Emma whispered, holding Lena tightly, but you don't have to do it alone. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. Lena took a shaky breath, letting the warmth of Emma's hug seep into her. For the first time in what felt like weeks, she didn't feel so entirely alone. She let the tears flow, feeling the release of everything she had been holding in for so long. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for now, she was grateful for Emma's support, for the love that was still present in her life, despite everything that had happened. As they sat down on the couch, Emma brought out some hot chocolate, trying her best to lift Lena's spirits. It wasn't much, but it was something. So, what now? Emma asked softly, her voice gentle but firm. What's the next step? Lena felt a lump form in her throat, but she didn't look away. She didn't have the answers, but she knew she couldn't keep avoiding the truth. I don't know. I have to decide what to do about the pregnancy. I don't even know if I'm ready for this, but I guess I need to make a decision. Emma nodded, her expression serious but supportive. And whatever decision you make, I'm here. I'll be by your side. Lena smiled weakly, feeling the first flicker of hope in days. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For the first time, in a long time, she didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. She had her friends, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start rebuilding her life. But even as the warmth from Emma's presence wrapped around her, Lena knew one thing for certain. The road ahead would be long and full of difficult choices. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but she was going to have to face it no matter what. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions, decisions, and small steps forward. Lena knew she couldn't avoid the reality of the situation anymore. The pregnancy, the trial, Dr. Simmons' betrayal, it all weighed heavily on her. But with Emma's unwavering support and her mother's quiet presence, Lena began to find a way to move through the fog of uncertainty. She scheduled appointments with specialists, seeking second opinions about the pregnancy. She wanted to make an informed decision, to understand her options fully, even if the thought of making a choice seemed almost impossible. Part of her wanted to run away from it all, to pretend none of it had ever happened, but she knew that wasn't an option. She couldn't pretend she was fine when everything inside her felt broken. As Lena walked through the clinic on the morning of her final appointment, she felt a sense of numbness wash over her. She had spent days weighing the pros and cons, asking herself if she was ready to be a mother, if she could handle the emotional and physical toll that raising a child would take. But the truth was, she didn't know. She didn't know if she was ready for any of it. The doctor she was meeting today knew someone who wasn't involved in the trial, someone whose opinion Lena could trust without the cloud of betrayal hanging over it. As she sat in this sterile white examination room once again, Lena tried to breathe deeply. reminding herself that she was making the best decision she could with the information available to her. When the doctor walked in, he smiled kindly at her, but his eyes softened as he noticed the uncertainty in her posture. "Lena," he said gently, "I understand this is a difficult time for you. We've reviewed everything, and I want you to know that we'll take it slow. You have options." Lena nodded, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. "I just don't know what to do. I never asked for this. I never wanted any of this." The doctor nodded in understanding. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed. You don't have to make any decisions right away, but you do need to consider what's best for you, your body, your future." Lena took a deep breath. She didn't want to be a mother, not now, not under these circumstances. She wasn't prepared, wasn't ready to take on that responsibility. She felt like she had lost control of her life, and the thought of bringing a child into that chaos felt impossible. But there was a part of her that couldn't shake the thought. What if this was an opportunity for something better? What if, in some strange way, this was a chance to find meaning, to rebuild what had been broken inside her? The decision wasn't clear, but for the first time in a long time, Lena felt like she had a choice. It wasn't a simple one, and there would be no easy answers, but she had the power to decide, and that meant more than anything else. After the appointment, Lena met Emma at a nearby cafe. They sat down at a small table, the sunlight filtering through the windows. Emma was quiet, waiting for Lena to speak, giving her the space she needed to process everything. Lena finally broke the silence. "I'm not ready to be a mother. Not now, maybe not ever. But I also don't want to make this decision without thinking it through. I want to make the right choice for me, not out of fear or panic. I have to take control of my life again." Emma nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to do it alone. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. You're stronger than you think, Lena, and I know you'll make the right choice for you." Lena smiled softly, feeling the weight on her shoulders lift just a little. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: she wasn't alone. She had people who cared about her, people who would stand by her no matter what. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, Lena thought about everything that had happened, how far she had come from that first appointment with Dr. Simmons, how much had changed in such a short time. She still didn't know what the right decision was, but for the first time, she felt like she had a sense of direction. She would take her time. She would make a choice when she was ready, not before. She would take control of her own future again, no matter what. And as the moonlight filtered through the curtains, Lena realized that despite everything she had been through, she was still standing. She was still here. And that, in itself, was a victory.